Hello, everyone, and happy Pride. Thank you so much for joining us for the latest segment of Affecting Change, EFF's live stream series, where our panelists tackle the latest issues in civil liberties and human rights in the digital world. Before proceeding, we've got a few housekeeping items to go over. So first, we've got a live caption team online with us today, and you can view those captions at livestream.eff.org. There, you can also participate in the Twitch chat. If you have questions throughout the program, please drop them in the chat and our guests will answer as many as they can at the end of the stream. If you're comfortable, we also encourage you to type a hello in the chat window now and let us know from which part of the world you're joining us. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF is a nonprofit composed of technologists, activists, and attorneys. Since 1990, EFF has been fighting for your right to create, innovate, and make yourself heard by anyone willing to listen without fear of unjust government or corporate surveillance. You are the reason that EFF can take on this important work, and if you'd like to help us out in the fight to defend your digital freedoms, please consider donating at eff.org/supportchange, or picking up some cool EFF gear, like this mug, at eff.org/shop. My name is Jillian York, and I'm the Director of International Freedom of Expression, and I work on all sorts of things related to that. But here today, I want to talk with our panelists about what they do. So it's my honor to introduce the participants in today's discussion. We've got Paige Collings at EFF, Soatak Dreamseeker, and Luisa Machado. As a reminder, we'll have about 15 minutes for your questions at the end. So if we haven't touched on something that you want to hear about, please ask. You can submit your questions via the Twitch chat at any time during the live stream. All right. So without further ado, we're going to just jump right in. I'd like to set the stage by having each person talk a little bit about what your day-to-day looks like, what you do for work. So I'll start with my colleague, Paige. Paige, can you kick us off and tell us a little bit about what EFF is doing during Pride this year, in past years, or all year?
Yes, thank you so much. And hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this special edition of Affecting Change for Pride Month. It's great to be here. So I think just to maybe firstly say Pride is often 1 month, mainly June, but in different months around the world. But at EFF, we're working on this topic throughout the year. It's not just contained to a few weeks in the middle. We know that the kind of increase in anti-LGBTQ intolerance, discrimination, and oppression is impacting people and communities both online and offline. And so that's typically where our focus is situated. We're looking at how anti-LGBTQ initiatives restrict freedom of speech and people's privacy, how it's fueling offline intolerance, how it's forcing people to self-censor their online expression to avoid being profiled, harassed, or doxxed, and how anti-LGBTQ legislation is fueling a lot of data surveillance as well. And so in the US, we see a growing number of states prohibit transgender youths from obtaining gender-affirming healthcare. There are restrictions on the way that people can obtain digital IDs and the deployment of that and the implementation of that through legislation like age verification mandates. We're expecting, and we see anti-LGBTQ investigators using tactics of anti-abortion investigators, seizing internet browsing and private messaging. And so we see across the board that there are lots of digital rights elements to the way that LGBTQ people are being surveilled and censored around the world. And so that's typically where our work at EFF departs and it goes to advance through. So typically we're working on issues like age verification, as I mentioned, legislation from the Anti-Homosexuality Act in places like Uganda, the Family Values Act that recently passed in Ghana, as well as pieces of legislation like the Online Safety Act in the UK, where we've seen the labeling of LGBTQ content as adult or harmful, while similar content that doesn't involve the LGBTQ community is often left untouched. And so we see these clear patterns from policymakers, from companies, targeting LGBTQ communities online in ways of trying to stifle their expression, surveil their movements, and how that transcends into an offline censorship as well. And so it's a pretty vast framing. It's an ecosystem of oppression and surveillance, but there are lots of different ways that we try and fight back. And one of them is to call attention to a lot of these issues and share a lot of essential information and resources. And so that's probably also looking to do here today.
Thanks, Paige, for introducing us to EFF's work. Sotak, you're a cryptographer, and you also write a blog that I, a quite non-technical person, also found to be pretty accessible. Can you tell us a bit about what your work looks like?
Sure. So my day-to-day job title is security engineer. I'm kind of in a weird place where I'm both doing like application security work, cryptography protocol design reviews, implementation reviews, but I also do a lot of engineering work, like designing and implementing cryptographic protocols, working on the implementation of post-quantum cryptography, all sorts of stuff that is not super relevant to the stuff I blog about. I made a deliberate decision years ago to try to keep my work separate from my blog. I've mostly succeeded, although I did write a viral post after I quit my last job that was really popular at Slack at my previous employer about return to office being bullshit. That was a fun thing to find out about afterwards. But addition to that, I also obviously I am on the internet as Soatalk, my persona, and as a result of you know being me, I've accidentally accumulated quite a few side projects that involve cryptography. Some of them were out of necessity. I switched to Mastodon after Elon Musk took over and discovered the direct messages were not encrypted. So I set about using my knowledge and background to try to build end-to-end encrypted messaging. Uh, it turns out there's a lot of hard engineering problems, a lot of boring infrastructure work that only like turbo nerds would really know about without having researched it or heard it from someone else. And one of those is key management. Leah Kisner, who was the CISO of Twitter a while ago and now I think works for LinkedIn, uh, is the first person I can find that's coined this phrase, that cryptography is the art of turning information security problems into key management problems. And the more I work in this space, the more true that is. So it, about a year into trying to build a proposal for end-to-end encryption, I got nerd sniped into the problem of how do you know you're talking to the right person and using the right key to encrypt messages to them. So I spent the past couple of years working on a proposal for key management for the Fediverse. Uh, at DEF CON last year, I also separately proposed a code signing protocol that uses what's called threshold cryptography. And it uses a protocol called Frost that, well, the Frost paper had a distributed key generation protocol, which is something where if you're doing like, if you need 7 keys, if you have 7 keys, like 7 different people each hold a special key, but you need like 4 of them to produce a zero, that's a threshold scheme. They've specified the signing protocol, but they didn't specify in the RFC the actual how to distribute the keys, and just said to use a straightforward protocol, which meant a lot of people built protocols where you have to reconstruct the secret and then sign with that instead of building actual signature out of shares. And then some people did like trusted dealer situations where you generate a private key and then split it after the fact instead of everybody generating a secret locally and then deciding the shared group key. So I also started a DKG or distributed key generation protocol called Cocktail, which is a recursive acronym, which is now a community cryptography specification project spec. It's c2sp.org. It's kind of like a cryptographer-led initiative to counter IETF bureaucracy. So if you've ever had to read an RFC before, you might also be a turbo nerd like me, but you might not know how much process goes into deciding which ones get RFC numbers and how many mailing list debates you can get bogged down into. This kind of sidesteps that and said, we're just going to let maintainers write their own specs and then use semantic versioning so they can update them without having to go through bureaucracy multiple times. So it's a fun project.
Great, thank you. And for everyone who's following along, you can find the link to Sotak's blog in the chat. Definitely check it out. Louisa, I'm going to turn to you now. You've served as a technical advisor on data and AI governance. You're also the founder of Equilabs. We'll throw that that link in the chat too, which at least one of the focuses is bringing young people into decision-making processes. Can you tell us more about what your work looks like and why that representation is so important?
Sure. So nice to be here, and thank you so much, EFF, for inviting me. I would say my work has always moved a little bit between two worlds because I have advised governments and international organizations on everything related to AI governance, data protection, digital transformation. And at the same time, I often entered those rooms as the youngest person there, often the only openly queer person, one of the very few people from the global majority. So, this experience being in these high level spaces, but feeling like I am um, representing something that is bigger than me, but at the same time, I am the only person with these intersections in these spaces, has taught me that actually exclusion goes beyond just like it goes beyond not being invited, because we have been seeing in the past years this desire by institutions to invite young people to participate, be it in AI and data governance and digital rights, or in climate or in other topics. So they would invite a young person or create a youth council and ask us to tell our stories while the real decisions were made somewhere else. I like to say that it's always been a bit like a children's table. So there is a child's table, but the adults are actually in the adults table making the decisions. Um, and this is why I decided to found Equilabs. So really in response to that gap. And what we do at Equilabs, we call ourselves a digital rights laboratory that is youth-led and queer-led. And what we do is that we combine anything from participatory research to political education, advocacy to movement building. And our sort of starting point is really how young people are already experiencing digital systems. So the frustration of being censored, the pressure to produce content for TikTok, for Instagram, at the same time, the fear of surveillance, the feeling and the fact that algorithms are already shaping our opportunities, but also the true excitement and community that digital spaces can create. Um, so what we do is that we work to turn these lived experiences and these feelings into something that is more concrete, such as demands, such as political analysis, and strategies that can then influence institutions and companies. So answering a little bit why I think this representation matters is because I as an academic, believe that lived experience is a form of expertise. And a young queer person like myself and like so many others who has learned to manage different identities across family, school, work, social media, understands something really sophisticated about privacy, about safety. They might not have the technical terms, but we do understand this problem so intimately. So I have witnessed working in government that these policies or policies that have been implemented to protect people actually get weaker when this kind of knowledge is excluded. And we're seeing this in age verification systems that don't actually understand what it means for a closeted teenager to have to submit an identity document, how violent that can look like, a platform that creates a safety policy, but then queer sexuality is inherently classified as adult. So there are so many layers to this work that I mean, I could talk about it forever, but I will stop here. But I think that the sort of bigger goal and issue is that we need to treat young people as political actors, and especially in digital governance, rather than this sustaining this narrative that we are future leaders, because decisions are being made now, we're being influenced. So yeah, that's a little bit of what we're doing.
Thank you. That's great. And I'm definitely want to come back to that thought in a minute. But I want to turn to Sotalk because you've also talked on your blog about how representation matters. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, so I had a bit of an interesting evolution of experiences. So I started my blog in 2020, the height of the pandemic. And my thought was just, I'm going to blog about things that are interesting to me, my own learning different areas of cryptography. And then I got like immediately nerd sniped into talking about things I already knew about. Um, and some of these things were popular on forums like Reddit and Hacker News. And I got a lot of weird pushback from people who at first who were like, oh, I can't show this to my boss, how dare you? And I had one person even go so far as to write and distribute custom uBlock origin filters to remove the totally work-safe furry art from my blog posts. So the pushback at first was a little weird. Um, there's a Tumblr comic from a Tumblr user whose username was like Flossy Nazi Hillipilification, called Fucking Nancy. And it has this like mermaid playing like a harp, and then you have like a ship captain who's like, I don't like the thing you're doing. Can you do a different thing that I like instead? And then Nancy zooms in on her face and says, I will increase the fucking thing. And so like that energy has stuck with me ever since I saw that comic. So when people started going, oh, how dare you put furry art in your furry blog talking about something I want to use professionally? I was like, okay, so you want more furry art and you want it gayer. Got it. So I started doing that, and that was a little bit of fun. But over time, people have pushed back less. And I think it might just be fatigue of going, okay, well, we're not going to change his mind. But it's also been other people were inspired to some degree and started their own blogs where they talked about their own technical interests, like retro computing or like microcontrollers and hardware hacking and all that other fun stuff that I'm not an expert in. And so over time, as more people show more representation of, queer identities, of being gay or trans or, wherever on those spectrum of identity labels you feel most comfortable, the pushback has gotten mostly to the noise floor. Like every once in a while, something I write will make Hacker News or Reddit, and there will be a comment or two, but they'll get like immediately flag killed and buried with downvotes. So most people can't see them unless they have show dead enabled on their HN account. And this transformation didn't happen because, I was hiding who I was. I was, being myself and not being ashamed. And that because I and a few others decided to do this. Now there are more of us, and because there are more of us, more people are like, "Oh yeah, it's the furries. They just make the internets go." And as a result, in one area of the internet, in one avenue of our online experience, it has gotten less toxic. And it's not the most impactful change that we could have in life, but I do think it does matter.
I think so too. And I think your comments, both of your comments, are really resonating with the comments on the live stream, which is fantastic. So bring it on, bring on the questions, folks who are listening. And I'll keep going on for now while we wait for you to weigh in. So I'm going to pivot just a little bit since we're here to talk about solidarity against surveillance. I want to make sure we talk a little bit about that. And I think I'm going to start with just asking, and anyone can jump in here. Paige, maybe I'll turn to you first since I haven't in a while. What are some of the specific concerns that queer communities broadly have when it comes to digital security and safety right now?
Thank you. And I think as Sartek and Louisa mentioned, there are so many different concerns that people may have from accessing information. If you're a transgender youth and you have a hostile family environment, or you're not able to find information offline, that you will turn to the online community to find that. You turn to digital spaces to obtain information, build communities, and engage in conversations that you might not have the capacity or ability to do in the offline world. And so there are those kind of considerations. There are considerations that we get asked. I have people asking me, Paige, how can I watch gay porn without people finding out? How can I know that? Do I need to download a VPN? Do I need to go into an incognito mode? How is it going to be safe for me to date online as a queer person? Can I download Grindr safely? What considerations can I take on dating apps to make sure that people might not be able to find out about me in my offline world? I think we are currently running a campaign or an initiative right now called LGBTQ&A, which is a play on the word, but it's essentially a question and answer that we've run. It's the second year that we're running this. And it's an opportunity for people to ask us questions about queer safety, surveillance, censorship. I'll read a few of those questions because I think this year we've been asked some, last year also brilliant questions, but this year we've received so many and they're all really nuanced and so specific. I mean, they range from what's one thing I can do today to improve my safety and security online? Do you predict that being openly trans on the internet will be harmful, and what can I do to figure that out if I'm trans? Is there a way for me to wipe all my data online so it can't point to my queer identity? How can I figure out if I'm safe around neural data laws? How can I attend a protest or a pride parade and not be tracked through phone GPS or flock cameras, age verification considerations in the UK? So there are lots of different questions, and you can see from those examples that I've just provided, and we'll be answering all of those in the next few weeks on our social media with some brilliant organizations in collaboration as well. So do pay attention to that if you're interested in the answers, or if you also have questions, please do submit those. We have many different ways that you can do that, and we'll be sure to answer them. But I think what we're seeing from this range of questions is that there are so many different scenarios that people are requiring or seeking information. You can see from that list that people are acknowledging that there are potential harms online, but that they still want to engage in these spaces. And I think this is a really important distinction, that what we're not trying to do is pivot people away from the online space. And Sautek just mentioned perfectly how we can build these spaces to be safer for queer people, to be fun. We want the internet to remain fun. We don't want to stifle it down. We want it to remain a place where people can go and build community and watch funny videos, find essential information. And so I think what also is really important in information sharing like this is trying to make sure that people can threat model to their own specific situations, and answering those questions. We have some brilliant technologists at EFF that provide individual threat modeling, where people can communicate their specific needs, and we can tailor that. And so also, if you're a queer person that needs a little bit more specific information, please do reach out to us and we can try and assist you in that. And I think just in general, filling this gap where we at EFF and Louisa and Saltat, we know we're experts in our specific scenarios and in our kind of spaces. And so there is a responsibility there to share that information and to break out of the ecosystem of digital rights and tech policy to make sure this information reaches people that need it the most. And so working with community groups, building out those relationships and ensuring that when we do engage, we have the trust of people to provide the answers, because we do often have information that is so vital for people. So I think beyond that, trying to build out these mechanisms for sharing, and for people to know that they can always come to EFF. And I know Equilabs is also providing so much information of this level. And so reaching out, finding those spaces, and making sure that people can take really easy steps. I think finally, this can feel really heavy. And you asked what are kind of the concerns that people had, Gillian, and so many, and so it can feel very omnipresent and scary. And we hear often, well, why should I care? This company already has my data. But we know that when with certain communities like queer people, the risk sometimes is massively amplified. That people can't take the risk in a company knowing their data. They can't take the risk in governments finding out that they were on a specific app. If you're in Uganda, you can't take that risk of being on a queer dating app. If you're in one of the states in the US where age verification mandates have been passed and it's censoring pro-LGBTQ content, you perhaps aren't able to take that risk in accessing those services and those websites and being on those platforms. And so I think it's also really important to acknowledge that people's scenarios are different, but we can take some really easy steps. We have a brilliant resource at EFF called Surveillance Self-Defense that one of my colleagues coordinates with lots of other people at the organization. And that's, we'll put the link in the chat, but that's also a brilliant resource that people can get general information. So on how you can, kind of 5 tips to attending a protest, what you can do to make sure that you've kind of covered the essential base kind of rules on protecting yourself. And then there are also just the general digital rights tips, right? Trying to use end-to-end encryption services as much as you can. And we have a lot of resources on that too. And so to not take up too much time in the conversation, we'll also post those in the chat. And we're always available for more information. So please do follow LGBTQ&A. We'll have all the answers that to many of the questions that I mentioned. And you'll probably see some familiar faces from similar organizations that are working on this, queer organizations, digital rights and human rights organizations, and hopefully also amplifying each other's work is one way to make sure that we're reaching the communities that need us the most.
Thank you, Paige. Louisa, I think you wanted to jump in here as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just so in awe of all the resources that Paige mentioned, and I do want to check all of them right now. So I love that. And I wanted to piggyback on something that Paige said, because I think I think most of us who are in these spaces, like, we understand that the risks that a closeted teenager face might be different from those of a trans activist, a migrant, a sex worker, when intersectionality comes at play. But one thing that for me connects many, if not all, of these realities is that when you're marginalized, you often need to decide who gets to know what about you. So someone may be out to their friends, but not to their family, or at school, but not for their employer. So this is something that is so critical in queer living and queer realities, that then when it is translated into the digital world, we see a lot of risks, because digital platforms can and often do take that choice away by exposing someone's identity or location or private searches. So on the surveillance side, I think digital systems can often collapse the boundaries that people rely on for their own safety. But then on the opposite side, so on the censorship side, we also see a huge impact on queer content being hugely removed, downranked, shadow banned. I think for me, one of the main issues that queer people are facing right now online is shadow banning, and that's specifically difficult to challenge, because when the account is not completely removed or deleted, which has been happening so often, and I know EFF has reported on that, Repro Uncensored has been doing a big work on taking these accounts back. But what we're seeing is that with that, I often feel like when you're a user and when you're a queer person, you understand very well the risks of shadow banning, because it affects how much information we have on sexual and reproductive health, abortion, trans healthcare, also queer organizing. But my issue, and something that I think needs to be more amplified, is that policymakers who are then regulating companies that are doing these kinds of shadow banning, they don't really understand what that is. Like, tell a middle-aged policymaker that you're being shadow banned, and he's gonna look at you like, what are you talking about? So I think that we really need to sort of, step up our game. And this is, again, it shouldn't be our responsibility, but as someone who is often in policymaking spaces, I often feel like it is my responsibility to educate these men on what's actually happening online, because this is often taken offline and has real impacts on real lives. So I just wanted to make a point about that as well.
I'm laughing because I know how true this is in some policy spaces. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing there. I had a question that I was going to go to, but I'm seeing so many good audience questions that I think I'm going to jump to one of those, and then maybe I'll pop back to mine. We'll see how it goes. So the first audience question, this is a great one, from Tanuki Wombat. All right. I am a cis-het white middle-aged middle-class dude. Sorry, it was one word, hard to parse. I know some ways that I can support and help make places safer, but they're my ideas from my experience. What are some ways that you see well-meaning people like me not being helpful, and what would you rather see? It's a great question. Does anyone want to take that one?
I can jump in, or maybe Saltak, if you. I don't want to put you on the spot. I know we just spoke.
Feel free. That's a bit open-ended, and I'm more on the tech back end.
There are some great questions that I would love to hear from you on, actually, so later in the chat. But I think this is a great question, because a lot of the time we might think to ourselves, we don't have anything to hide, or, well, I'm not at risk, so what can I really do? But the internet is full of interconnectivity. And so one thing that is really important is making sure that you've built out digital ecosystems that benefit other people. And it's really important to think about your device as being a shared digital space as such. And so when you're communicating with people, what information is being shared and where is that going? What pictures have you stored of people? What services are you using? And so building out this essentially being using end-to-end encrypted services to make sure that if you don't have anything to hide, or you don't feel like there's information that you're worried about being leaked, but you're protecting the other person that might be, making sure that if you're going to a pride parade or a pride event or a protest, that if you're taking pictures, you're really vigilant on where they're being shared to, how they're being stored. Some platforms don't provide end-to-end encrypted clouds, but they might have encrypted clouds, and there's a question in the chat about that too. And so being vigilant to make sure that not just for your own digital safety, but the digital safety of other people that you may be communicating with. There's always the financial element of donating and supporting a lot of queer community groups, youth groups that are around the world doing some really important work, supporting and amplifying the work of other people too. And ensuring that to be in a community, you have to be in the community. To be in the village, you're in the village. And so to being a villager is most importantly listening to people that often need something, that have higher needs in a specific moment in time, because you have perhaps more resources and availability to do that in the moment. And so making sure that you've kind of done that digital hygiene check. So when you're communicating with people who are queer, that you're not risking leaks of their information and data and their photos because your device is not set up to be as safe as possible. There are so many other considerations, but I'd love to hear from my fellow panelists on what they would think too.
Yeah, I would absolutely like to turn it. Oh, please, Louisa, jump in. Sorry.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to add a few points more on the organizing. Obviously, I don't know the details of how each person is engaging with politics. And when I say politics, anything can be politics. A WhatsApp group or a Signal group or Telegram chat can be politics. So I think for me, it's about understanding when it's time to step aside, because what I often, as answering the question of what I see well-meaning privileged folks doing that I think ends up being harmful, is that they end up like using the knowledge of queer people, of young people, of historically marginalized folks, and educating is a kind of work. Educating is free labor. So when we are asked in consultations or in chats to explain something, to tell people how to do better or what things can do, this is also labor. So understanding when maybe is an opportunity to step aside, and instead of relaying the information that you harvested from these people, to actually let them lead. I think when we use our privileges to give stages, and again, when I say stages, it can be in any kind of dynamic. It can be from family to work to actual politics. We see how the space transforms and how everyone actually feels more at ease relaying their own ideas and feelings and thoughts and experiences. So yeah, recognizing your privileges and letting go of this harvesting of information mindset that I specifically see with very well-meaning people.
Thank you. That's great. So Atak, I've got a slightly different question for you, but I think it still speaks to some of the stuff that that we've been hearing from the other panelists. As a cryptographer, what's one thing that you think that the average queer or otherwise vulnerable person should know about cryptography?
Yeah, so this is a bit of a nuanced answer. So in an ideal world, my answer would be nothing. Cryptography is deeply technical. It is very easy to get wrong, but when you get it wrong, you won't realize it's wrong. The failure mode is that you get no privacy or no integrity or no authentication, but the failure is silent. It's not always obvious. So if you want to become a cryptographer, by all means, learn this stuff. In the ideal world, you shouldn't need to know cryptography to use it safely, just as you don't need to be a civil engineer to cross a bridge. We don't live in that world today. Matt Green's wrote in a post recently where he said, cryptography is a means to extend trust beyond across space and time. And I like to add in a non-ideal world to that description. Um, if you are starting from a position of infinite trust with the other person, you don't need to encrypt. If you're starting with a position of zero trust, what does encryption do other than like you're still telling somebody something that you don't trust them with? So a finite amount of trust is kind of the real world we live in today. And trust is an entirely social thing. Like you can't write an algorithm for how much I trust Louisa, for example, or how much they trust me. That doesn't have a mathematical description. You can codify what's already there in mathematics, and you can use mathematics to describe how people feel and measure it across some arbitrary spectrum. But you can't just like decide that from like pure software. Most technology problems are social problems first. And it's very tempting to build something, especially if you're like really passionate about programming. But it's also very dangerous to build something insecure. And that's why a lot of security people will say, don't roll your own crypto. There's a big asterisk on that. But generally, you shouldn't be writing like your own block ciphers or hash functions. And you also shouldn't be designing, your own competitors to the noise protocol framework. What people very often do is part of their self-education. Um, and so because we're in this non-ideal world where people do need to learn something about cryptography, um, people who do know it, like my background is in auditing cryptography implementations. I didn't get there by going to college and getting a PhD in cryptography. I got there by finding vulnerabilities and getting stacks of CVEs for things that, in hindsight, seem very trivial. So the one thing you should know about cryptography, in a world where it's not ideal, uh, most of the work to make cryptography easy to use for like software developers or end users, uh, people in my profession should have been doing a good job for the past 30 plus years to make it easier. Like, I'll go back to the thing I said about the civil engineer thing. Um, you know, uh, you can live in a house. You did not know how to have to know how the house is built to use it. Cryptography is not like that at all. Swift on security, the fun Blue Sky account that used to be on Twitter, is famous for saying cryptography is nightmare magic math that cares what color pin you use. Little known fact, Swift on security used to vet cryptography jokes with me, which had the unfortunate side effect of people asking if I was Swift on security, which was really funny because I'm not. Um, and that's kind of, it encapsulates the vibe of, I'll give you a technical example. You can encrypt two different messages. So if I'm sending Louisa a message that says, let's get breakfast tomorrow at 9 a.m., and I send Julian a message that says, we attack at dawn, ready the, paintball guns, something silly. I can encrypt those two messages using modern authenticated encryption with two different keys and have them become the same ciphertext with an authentication tag. Now, this little expectation is a little astonishing. So, like when Facebook Messenger was adding AES GCM, which is an authenticated cipher, to their encryption protocol, if you have the different keys or you know you have all this other assumptions in place. Oh, it's secure. It looks like random noise. It's indistinguishable from encrypting zeros. All that held true, but you can still get two messages with the same ciphertext and tag. And you might think, okay, well, what does that give you? Abuse reporting. I report a message. I give them key one. The message that the actual user derived was key two. They got a message that said like something hateful and harassing. The moderator opens it and it's a picture of a cute bunny. In the demo, they used a salamander, so they called this the invisible salamanders attack. There's a related one with signature algorithms. Signature algorithms don't bind to the key the correct way that you would assume that they do. This is called exclusive ownership. These are the kinds of things people in my profession know and care about, and we try to design modern protocols that don't have these pitfalls. One of the cool things about the post-quantum signature algorithms is that they aren't susceptible to it, which makes MLDSA, the new NIST standard for post-quantum signatures, immediately safer than almost everything that came before it that people are used to using. So even if a quantum computer never materializes, you're safer using that than you would be, say, ECDSA or RSA signatures. You don't need to know any of this. It will not be on the final, but that's the level of depth that goes into casual conversations about this without even getting into the math. So if I had to take away anything, cryptography is really hard. It is very technical. The details matter a lot. And the only reason people roll their own is because the people who actually are qualified to write the code are poorly allocated on projects. We aren't meeting people where they are. We aren't building the systems they need to do their job correctly and safely and to protect them from the threats they care about. And I'm trying to do better. That's why my key transparency project, literally all I'm doing is vending a key and having a way to prove that this was the other users on the Fediverse, which is, decentralized. I'm not building the end-to-end encryption part. The W3C has already decided to do that. All I'm doing is building a thing to where you can manage the keys that you actually trust to use their system. And if it works out and they actually, implement this as part of their spec, it'll be one of the first like end-to-end encryption messages that's decentralized and has key transparency, because WhatsApp and Signal already have it built in.
Thank you. That's great. I'm so glad you said we're not meeting people where we are. I think that's something a lot of us agree with as well. And I know that there are folks in the audience today who did understand every word of what you said, which is great. Because for me, if it were on the final, I think I would fail. But I appreciate hearing about it. It's super interesting. So I am going to shift to a different question from the audience right now, from Glee Monex9, which is there anything that local jurisdictions can do against, I'm assuming they mean to fight back against age verification laws?
Louisa, go ahead.
Yes. I think so. Here, I think we need to talk broader about sort of like the age verification debate and how it has been coming up in policy. And I can say more broadly about international policy and international law, so on an European level or UN level. And I think that when we are talking about the social media bans and age verification, we're creating a certain idea of protection, which is that young people become safer when institutions create distance between them and risk. But they are also teaching something to young people about power, that when institutions and local governments or national governments face a difficult social problem, the first response is often to restrict the people with the least institutional power. So we should really be asking what kind of relationship to democratic governance these policies are creating. So for me, when it comes to influencing local legislation, I think we need to understand, okay, what are the strategies that the pro-age verification group has been using? And I had a really interesting conversation recently to a tech advisor in the German Bundestag. I'm Brazilian, but I live in Germany. And this tech advisor was telling me that members of the German government were coming to her worried because they were receiving nonstop calls from parents asking for this kind of law and for age verification, and that members were feeling really pressed to actually pass on these laws because of these worried parents calling. And that really stayed with me because I immediately thought, okay, where are the calls from young people, from youth organizations, from digital rights organizations, telling them not to pass these laws? And I mean, I'm a campaigner. We've been campaigning against it. But I think that the difference is that parents and kind of pro-age verification groups have a very clear emotional demand, which is protect my child. Policymakers understand that, media understand that, but us who have been advocating for digital rights, and in my case for youth empowerment, we also understand that young people's relationship to digital spaces is far more complex than that. Young people know that platforms are harming them. They know that addictive design, algorithmic feeds, endless scroll, violent content, they are real problems, but they also know that these are spaces that they can learn, create, and organize. So for me, this complexity is politically harder to mobilize for laws than fear. So I think that movements need to be better at organizing complexity, because if fear is organized, then rights and empowerment need to be organized too. And of course, there are so many strategies, and maybe Paige can talk better about that, but I will also link in the chat a campaign that Equilabs is hosting with EDRI and other youth organizations that is against age verification and against age gates and social media bans. And I invite everyone to read through and join us in this battle, I guess.
Great, thank you. And we'll get that link into the chat. Paige, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, Louisa's contribution there was brilliant. There's not too much to add beyond that. They covered it wonderfully. But I think maybe just a final thing is there are understanding that core fear and the concern is really imperative to ascertaining why age verification and age assurance legislative developments are passing at a prolific rate around the world. We just saw a social media ban pass in the UK this week that people under the age of 16 will not have access to social media platforms as of spring next year. It's one of so many. We're seeing it in Malaysia, Indonesia. More than half the states in the US now have legislation that is around the idea of age verification or age assurance. And so there are more people than not that are being impacted by this, and it's a developing situation. And as Louisa so perfectly elucidated, it's based on this kind of fear and panic of protecting young people, or as the people passing this legislation, it's protecting the children. And it's a hard argument to counter, because we also want to protect children. I think this is a really crucial part of any advocacy that we take at EFF is we are not advocating for an environment that harms young people online. We actually want to make sure that the internet remains a safe and available space for young people, all people, but in this conversation, young people to exist. And so we are providing, and as Louisa communicated, we're providing sophisticated, nuanced solutions to policymakers to ensure that young people still have access to the internet. They are deciding to actively ignore that and pursue an easy solution that you can kind of understand that it makes headlines. It's politically quite successful right now to pass a piece of legislation like this, but it's lazy and it's inadequate, and it will not create a safer space for young people online. And so I think it's also really important to continue amplifying the reasons why we keep communicating this, and also providing those solutions that we have when we believe this is it's transcending a space where the internet can be available for young people. At the same time, at EFF, we're undertaking kind of a slew of litigation initiatives. There are lots of different ways that legislation like this impinges on fundamental privacy and civil liberties, free speech, human rights in general. And what we can see kind of in the UK, for example, is how it might connect to data retention for younger people. In the EU, how it impinges on GDPR compliance. And so there are lots of different legislative developments that we can levy litigation for the purposes of protecting the internet for young people and all people. Because I think also what we need to remember in this is, as much as we talk about protecting the kids as the initiators of this legislation would communicate, it also is requiring everybody to upload information to ensure that you're over the age of the requirement. So right now in the UK, the social media ban is 16. In the US, it varies, and it's often 18. Some countries are 15, Australia. So whatever that age is, I will also need to upload my data to make sure that platforms know that I am over that age. And so when we're also talking about the impact on people's individual privacy, on data retention, on biometric surveillance, and how providing this information, however it is requested, will contribute to the ecosystem of data surveillance, we also need to remember that it's every user all users online are impacted by this. It's, of course, something that's very omnipresent, and it's impacting people everywhere. And so, yes, young people are particularly targeted because it is eroding fundamental access to imperative information that they will need, but it is also impacting all people as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing age verification bills pop up all over the world. It's definitely an issue that EFF is very much on top of, as is Louisa. And Suatak, you also had something you wanted to add about age verification, so please jump in.
Yeah, so when we're fighting age verification initiatives, it's important to have an alternative that actually delivers the safety that we want to have for especially youth and marginalized people that these surveillance-oriented approaches aren't offering. When I mentioned Swift on security, a little-known project of theirs is called decentsecurity.com, and one of the premises on this is that everybody can be secure. The security is not some magical thing that only a select few can learn. And so the counter to age verification and all the surveillance tech must be giving people more agency over their devices and their data, and how that data is used by third parties if it's given to them at all. And whenever, as somebody who works in cryptography, people talk about age verification, one of the questions I almost always get is about zero knowledge proofs. Google had a project called Longfellow that could take your passport and your existing signature from the US State Department and prove that you're over 18 without revealing any information about who you are or your date of birth or any other unique identifiers. And there's a lot of work in this space to make zero knowledge proofs work. Unfortunately, they're very complicated. They're very easy to make a mistake in implementation. And the implementation mistakes are often things like if you have two pieces of data you're trying to add to a hash function, which is a one-way transformation of arbitrary length to a fixed length output. How you feed your data into that hash function can completely break your zero knowledge proofs. There's this thing called the frozen heart attack that's based on this. I've written about it on my blog about panicalization attacks. There was a dumb vulnerability in IOTA, the cryptocurrency's hash function, where if you change the last bits to 1, -1, or 0 and swap between them, you could get 3 different inputs that made the same hash. These are dumb bugs, but they actually break real-world systems when they're deployed. So if anybody's expecting zero knowledge proofs to come in and save the day, they might be able to, but the other part of that is that this legislation is often written to completely prevent them from being acceptable. And the best place to implement something like a zero knowledge proof is to actually have the government build such a thing and offer the proofs through Privacy Pass or some other zero knowledge credential. Governments are not interested in doing that because it undermines, the kind of power plays that the politicians are doing here. I don't think it's an accident that, youth and marginalized people are always, targeted by these initiatives and hurt the most. I think that's kind of the point behind a lot of it. That's all I want to say
Thank
on that.
you. No, thank you. And I really appreciate it. I think that there's so much that folks have gotten to learn from all of you today. And I thank you so much. And I am going to take one more final question, but I'm going to shift it towards positivity and optimism because it is Pride Month and I want a little bit of joy here. And I think that there are a lot of things for us to feel empowered about. So I'm going to frame it. When Louisa and I chatted briefly in preparation for this, she talked about the growing disempowerment that people are feeling about surveillance. But what I want to know is what each of you, and Louisa, I'm going to turn to you first, what you feel that we can do to organize against surveillance. How can people feel more empowered with all of this going on?
Yes, I love that because I think many people understand that they are being watched, profiled, influenced. They just don't really know exactly how because the infrastructure is so big and technical and opaque. But for me, empowerment really begins by refusing this isolation that we often feel, that there's something bigger than us that is controlling us and we cannot really do anything about it. Because actually, when people come together, they understand that there is a political system that is influencing all of these decisions. And that's how you build movements, right? So I think that we, in different topics such as climate, labor, sexual reproductive rights, we have understood that we change laws by organizing and by building movements and by uniting. And I think in digital rights, we're starting to understand that, that actually we can change laws and regulations if we organize. So there are different ways of organizing, be it online, offline, but if you understand that something is wrong, then there is something that you can do about it. So I would really touch upon the power of solidarity here and on organizing.
Thank you so much. Paige?
Yes, I was also going to say the importance of movement building. Louisa and I are cut from the same cloth there. We are also collaborators, but yeah, I think it's super important to not exist in isolation. People are experiencing challenges with the internet, but they're also connecting on the internet. And it's important, imperative even, that we make sure that we can take those lifts, work in communities, drive issues forward, with vulnerable and impacted people at the forefront all the time. It's important that we continue to, I know I see a comment here, the internet has to stay free. It is imperative that the internet stays free and an open space for people to engage however they wish, in a safe and enjoyable way. Taking those kind of digital hygiene steps, working in community, building out community privacy plans, and trying to find space for joy. I think, you mentioned how can we still exist, but I think it's so important that we continue to carve out those spaces for ourselves, whether that's some of the kind of tools that Saltec has mentioned that are so much more technically advanced than my intelligence has the capacity to really operationalize, but working with people who can build out those tools, creating solutions for our own selves, for our community. There are so many civic tech solutions to a lot of problems and a lot of harms. If you feel like you want to divest from big tech and go to smaller platforms, interoperable, decentralized platforms, if you feel like you want to kind of take yourself away from certain spaces, it's all about that, and seeing what the people that you work with and exist with closest are also experiencing, and how this can be sustainable. Because I think what we're also looking for is a sustainability and not a continual flipping between kind of services that might not be sustainable for people, because we want to make sure that this has the legs for longevity as well.
Thanks, Paige. And Sodak?
Yeah,
Over to you.
I think what both of my fellow panelists have said is perfectly on point. The other thing I would add, humans are social creatures, which is kind of funny saying that with this avatar. But it's also important to remember that taking breaks is part of the work. You do need to pace yourself. You do need to take time to recharge, and you do need to, not just build joy, but build connections with the people around you. We're all in this together.
That is the perfect response. Thank you so much. And I'm afraid, folks, that that's all we have time for. So I want to give a big round of thanks to Paige, Soatok, and Louisa for joining us today. Thank you. You were all fantastic. And thank you to everyone who contributed to the discussion in the chat, all the great questions that you sent in. I'm sorry we didn't get to them all. And to everyone who is watching from all over the world. We've said it before and we'll say it again. Digital rights begin with you. EFF has been a leader in privacy, freedom of expression, and innovation for more than 35 years, and we need your help to keep up the fight. Please take 10 minutes now to become a member today at eff.org/supportchange. And please continue these conversations about civil liberties with your colleagues and friends. Send them a blog post from us or from one of our wonderful panelists today. And once you're done renewing your EFF membership, be sure to mark your calendar for the next segment of Affecting Change on July 23rd, which will be If You Own It, Why Can't You Fix It? Featuring Adam Savage and Kyle Means from iFixit. Thank you for joining us, and see you next time, and happy Pride.